My name is Jack, and I'm 52 years old. I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 24 years. She's 47 now, but you wouldn't know it by looking at her. Sarah is tall, with long blonde hair and a figure she's kept fit through years of yoga and daily exercise. She looks younger than her age, and to be honest, I've always felt lucky to be with her. We have two grown sons, Matt and Ben, who both got married recently and started families of their own. They live nearby, so we see them quite often, which has always been a joy. I work for a large pharmaceutical company out of New Jersey, one of the biggest names in the business when it comes to producing both brand name and generic medications. Lately, though, my job has been pure chaos. The FDA flagged some issues with our records, which triggered a series of non-stop audits. As the VP of Compliance, I've been up to my neck in work, traveling to our various warehouses across the country for inspections. My workload has been brutal, but I've finally started training a few new hires to help shoulder the burden. Things are starting to lighten up, just in time for me to prepare for my retirement, which I had been planning to coincide with our upcoming 25th anniversary. It was going to be a surprise for Sarah, something I hadn't told her about yet. One afternoon, with a rare bit of free time, I decided to start planning a special gift for Sarah to celebrate our milestone. I wandered downtown and found this tiny, hidden jewelry shop that a friend had recommended. He'd had a custom locket made for his wife there, so I figured it would be the perfect place to get something unique for Sarah. I had an old 15-carat diamond ring I never wore anymore, and I thought it would be a nice gesture to have it reset into a necklace for her. The jeweler, a friendly man who had been in the US for years, took one look at the diamond and told me it was flawless. We picked out a beautiful white gold setting with 3 smaller diamonds surrounding the center stone, and he promised it would be ready in a couple of weeks, just in time for our anniversary. Feeling pretty good about myself, I stepped out of the shop onto the busy street. That's when I saw her. Sarah, my wife, was walking out of a hotel across the street. I ducked into the alley, instinctively not wanting her to see me. I was confused. She hadn't mentioned anything about being downtown that day, let alone being at a hotel. But then, to make things worse, I saw Tom, one of my closest friends, walk out right behind her. He said something to her that made her laugh before she hopped into a cab. Tom headed off in the opposite direction. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I've known Tom for over 10 years. He used to be our realtor, the guy who helped us find our house, and over the years, he and his wife, Lisa, had become close friends of ours. We'd even taken a few vacations together before work started to consume my life. What was he doing with Sarah? Why hadn't she mentioned meeting him? That night, I decided I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I'd ask her some casual questions, see if she would bring up anything about being downtown. Maybe it was something innocent, like planning a surprise for our anniversary, and Tom was just helping her. But as much as I tried to reassure myself, something in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. When I got home that evening, everything seemed normal at first. Our house, a big 2-story colonial, felt a bit too quiet since the boys had moved out, but Sarah was there, waiting for me like always. We exchanged our usual pleasantries, and she asked me how my day had been. I told her I'd been busy at work, preparing for my next business trip. Then she casually mentioned she'd spent the entire day at home, tidying up. My heart sank. Why would she lie about that? I knew I'd seen her downtown. Trying not to let on that I was suspicious, I asked her if she'd seen Tom lately. I made up some excuse about needing to pass along some information about a business issue he'd asked me about. Without missing a beat, Sarah said she hadn't seen him since we were all at his place the week before. The lie felt like a punch to the gut. I decided to let it go for the night, but I knew something was very wrong. The more I thought about it, the more things started to click into place. Sarah and I hadn't been intimate in over 6 months. Every time I tried to initiate anything, she'd come up with some excuse. Headaches, being too tired, or just not being in the mood, she always had a reason. The last time I tried was just a few nights ago. I remember that night clearly. It was a Sunday, and she claimed she suddenly had a headache. I didn't push her on it, but something about the whole situation had been nagging at me ever since. Now, after seeing her with Tom, it made me wonder if there was something more going on. That evening, I suggested we invite Tom and Lisa over for dinner, maybe later in the week. It was something we hadn't done in a while, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to see how Sarah would react. But Sarah shrugged it off. She said she wasn't feeling up to hosting anyone and suggested we postpone until next week. Of course, she knew I'd be out of town by then. I wasn't too keen on making plans while I'd be away, so I pushed back, saying I really wanted to see them before I left. Then, I casually asked if something had happened between her and Tom, as she seemed uneasy when I mentioned him. That question hit a nerve. Sarah quickly got up, mumbling something about needing to use the bathroom, leaving me sitting there, alone with my suspicions. Her reaction only made me more certain that something was off. I wasn't going to confront her right then and there, but I knew I needed to find out more. If Sarah was hiding something, and I was almost sure she was, then I had to be smart about how I handled it. It wasn't just about catching her in a lie, I needed proof. The next day, while Sarah was out running errands, I made a phone call to an old buddy of mine. We used to work together on some tech projects, and he knew everything there was to know about surveillance equipment. I didn't give him the whole story, just told him I needed some discreet devices for a personal matter. He didn't ask many questions, just recommended a few things and sent me to the right place to get them. That afternoon, I had everything delivered to my office, a set of tiny, voice-activated bugs, 2 receivers, and a recorder with enough range to cover the house and even track what was happening in Sarah's car. The plan was simple. I'd plant the bugs around the house in key spots where she spent the most time and hide a receiver in her car to record conversations when she was out. This way, I could monitor what she was up to without her knowing a thing. That night, after she'd gone to bed early, I got to work. First, I planted the bugs in a few rooms, making sure they were well hidden. Then, while she was asleep, I slipped out to her car and tucked the recorder in a spot where she'd never think to look. After testing everything out, I was satisfied that it all worked perfectly. Now all I had to do was. The next few days dragged on. I was anxious, constantly thinking about what I might find. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that it was all just in my head. But deep down, I feared that what I suspected was true. Finally, Friday rolled around. After dinner that night, once Sarah had gone to bed, I went down to the basement where I had the receiver set up. I took a deep breath and hit play. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the sounds of her answering the phone, chatting casually. But then I heard her say something that stopped me cold. "Why are you calling now? I told you, I can't meet today or tomorrow. Not until Jack's out of town. Same time and place as usual." That was all I needed to hear. My worst fears were confirmed. She was having an affair, and it wasn't just with anyone. It was with Tom, the man I thought was one of my closest friends. That phone call was all the confirmation I needed, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't ready to confront Sarah just yet. I knew I had to get more proof, something solid, something that would leave no room for doubt. I wanted to be fully prepared, not just for my own peace of mind, but in case this turned into a legal matter. If I was going to confront her, I needed everything lined up perfectly. The weekend was agonizing. I could barely look at Sarah without feeling this heavy weight pressing down on me. I avoided her as much as possible, keeping my distance. Every time I saw her smile or heard her laugh, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal, how she had lied to me so effortlessly. I decided to keep gathering evidence. Over the next couple of weeks, I listened in on her conversations and recorded everything. I heard her make plans with Tom for their next meetup, scheduled for a Wednesday, the day I was supposed to be out of town. I could hardly wait for the day to arrive. It would be my chance to catch them in the act. When Wednesday finally came, I made a point of leaving for work early, acting like I was heading out of town for my business trip as usual. But instead, I turned around and came home a few hours later. I parked down the street, out of sight, and waited. Sure enough, around noon, Sarah got into her car and drove off. I followed her at a distance, keeping far enough back so she wouldn't notice. She drove straight to the hotel I had seen her at before, the same one where I had first spotted her and Tom. I parked across the street, watching as she met up with him in the hotel lobby. They didn't waste any time. After exchanging a few words, they headed upstairs together. I waited in the car for nearly 2 hours before they finally came back down. Watching them leave, laughing like nothing was wrong, made my blood boil. I followed Sarah home, then headed back myself, determined to listen to the recording she had made in the car. That evening, after dinner, I went down to the basement and pulled out the recording device from her car. There were nearly 2 hours of audio, and my hands were shaking as I hit play. The first part was just small talk, them making light conversation about their day. But then it quickly shifted into something much more intimate. Their voices lowered, and the flirtation began. What hurt the most wasn't just the fact that Sarah was having an affair. It was how casual it all seemed to them. They talked about their meetings like it was just another part of their day, a routine. And then, the unmistakable sounds of them together, the creak of the bed, their hushed whispers, it was gut-wrenching. It felt like everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was unraveling in those few moments. But what struck me the most was Sarah's tone. She sounded distant, almost indifferent, like she was going through the motions, but without any real emotion behind it. It didn't feel passionate or even meaningful, it felt hollow. The whole thing lasted less than half an hour, and when it was over, they went back to chatting about mundane things, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't listen anymore. I rewound the tape, made a copy, and locked it in my safe. The original recording stayed in my briefcase, ready for when I would need it. That night, sitting across from Sarah at the dinner table, I could barely stand to look at her. She went through her usual routine, completely unaware of what was coming. I knew I had to confront her eventually, but I wasn't ready yet. Not until I had everything in place. 3 days before our anniversary, something unexpected happened. While listening to one of the newer recordings, I heard the doorbell ring. It was Tom. He had shown up at our house, which threw Sarah into a panic. From what I gathered, he wanted more from her, maybe to take their relationship further, but she was furious that he'd come to our home. She scolded him for bringing their affair into our space, and after a brief argument, she slammed the door in his face. While that gave me some strange sense of relief, it didn't change the facts. She was still hiding things, and she was still meeting him behind my back. That was all I needed to move forward with my plan. I contacted a lawyer and had divorce papers drawn up, but I wasn't going to serve them yet. I had one last move to make, and I was going to make sure it left an impact. The night of our anniversary party was coming up, and that was when I would confront her, right in front of Tom and everyone else. It was going to be an anniversary she would never forget. The day of our anniversary party finally arrived. It was supposed to be a big celebration, marking 25 years of marriage, but for me, it felt more like the beginning of the end. I had everything planned. I'd confront Sarah in front of Tom and his wife, Lisa, with all the evidence I had gathered. I wanted to hit her where it hurt, and I knew this was the moment to do it. That morning, I decided to drop the cold attitude I'd had towards Sarah in recent weeks. I needed to play along for now, to make sure she didn't suspect anything before the big reveal. We spent the day getting ready for the party together, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she actually smiled at me. It almost felt normal, like we were just any other couple preparing for a celebration. But I knew better. I knew the truth. About an hour before the guests were supposed to arrive, I asked her if she was going to wear the blue dress I had bought for her last year. It was a dress I loved on her, one that made her look stunning. She hesitated at first, saying she didn't think it looked as good on her as I claimed, but she eventually agreed to wear it. I kept my own outfit simple, just a shirt and tie. Nothing fancy. Before we headed downstairs to greet the guests, I took out the necklace I had custom-made for her, the one with the diamond I had reset just for this occasion. I opened the box and fastened it around her neck, watching as she admired herself in the mirror. She thanked me, saying it was beautiful and that she would cherish it forever. She even kissed me, and for a brief moment, I felt that old spark between us. But it was bittersweet, knowing what was about to happen. By 6:45, we were ready, and the first guests started to arrive. Naturally, Tom and Lisa were the first to show up. I shook Tom's hand, pretending everything was normal, even though I could barely stand to look at him. Lisa greeted Sarah with the same warmth as always, completely unaware of what was going on behind her back. Tom congratulated me, telling me I had it all: a beautiful home, a loving family, and a stunning wife. I thanked him, but I couldn't resist adding, "You know, Tom, things aren't always what they seem." He gave me a puzzled look, but shrugged it off, laughing as if I were making a joke. I turned to Lisa, hugged her, and whispered, "Sometimes things aren't as perfect as they look." She looked at me with concern, but I shook my head, signaling that it wasn't the time to explain. As more guests arrived, the party moved into full swing. I kept a close eye on Sarah and Tom the entire evening. They exchanged glances a few times, but I made sure they never had a chance to slip away and be alone together. At one point, Sarah tried to pull Tom aside for a private conversation, but I stayed close by, making sure they didn't get any real privacy. I could see the tension in her eyes, but I wasn't going to let her off that easily. When it was time for dinner, everyone gathered in the dining room. We had arranged the seating beforehand, and I ended up sitting between my daughters-in-law, with Sarah on the opposite side of the table. The meal was perfect. The caterers had done an excellent job, and the conversation flowed easily around the table. But I wasn't really paying attention to any of it. I was too focused on what was coming next. After dinner, I stood up and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me. This was it, the moment I had been building up to for weeks. I took a deep breath and thanked everyone for coming, for supporting Sarah and me on such a special occasion. Then I turned to Sarah, raising my glass toward her. And finally, I said, "I want to raise a toast to my beautiful wife, Sarah." Everyone turned to look at her, smiling and expecting me to deliver some heartfelt words about our marriage. But instead, I set my glass down without taking a sip, a small gesture that only Sarah seemed to notice. Her smile faltered, and when our eyes met, I could see confusion flash across her face. She knew something was off, but she had no idea what was about to hit her. The room was silent, everyone watching me expectantly, but I wasn't going to give a speech about love or our years together. Instead, I looked directly at Sarah, keeping my voice steady. "Sarah, I was planning something special for our anniversary," I began. "I had booked us a trip, a flight to Miami and a cruise afterward. But I realized it might conflict with your Wednesday afternoon meetings at the hotel with Tom." The air was sucked out of the room in an instant. You could hear a pin drop. Sarah's face went pale, her eyes wide in shock as the weight of my words hit her. She stammered, trying to say something, but nothing came out. Tom, sitting across the room, looked just as shocked, his face turning white as if all the blood had drained from him. And then there was Lisa. I could see the slow realization dawning on her face as she turned to look at her husband, her expression turning from confusion to anger. I didn't stop there. I walked over to the table and pulled out the small recorder I had hidden in my briefcase. Without saying another word, I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Sarah and Tom's voices, their intimate conversation, their flirtation, their betrayal. Every word played out in front of everyone. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face as the recording continued. She looked devastated, but I couldn't feel any sympathy for her. Tom, on the other hand, looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. And then Lisa stood up. The rage in her eyes was unmistakable. She slapped Tom so hard across the face that the sound echoed through the room. "You bastard!" she screamed, her voice trembling with fury. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Tom tried to stammer out some excuse, but Lisa wasn't having it. She turned on Sarah next, glaring at her with pure hatred. "You've destroyed everything," she shouted, her voice breaking. "2 families. 10 years of friendship. For what? For this?" Sarah sobbed, unable to respond, her whole body trembling as she collapsed into her chair. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling strangely detached. It was like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, but it was mine. My marriage, my friendship, all of it had crumbled in front of me, and there was no going back. Finally, I stepped forward, my voice calm but cold. "Tom, I want you out of my house. And I never want to see you again." Tom, still holding his cheek where Lisa had slapped him, nodded silently. He couldn't even look at me. He gathered his things and left, with Lisa storming out behind him. I didn't bother watching them leave, they were out of my life for good. When I turned back to Sarah, she was still sitting there, sobbing uncontrollably. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and regret. "Please, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Please, just give me a chance to explain. I had expected this. The apologies, the pleading, the desperate attempts to save what we once had. But I was past the point of caring. I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out the envelope containing the divorce papers. I held them out to her. These are the divorce papers, I said quietly. I had them drawn up last week. If you sign them without a fight, you can keep the house. I'll give you a generous settlement. But if you contest it, I'll take everything. And I'll make sure our sons know exactly what happened. I've already written them letters explaining everything. The choice is yours. Sarah's face crumpled as she fell to the floor, sobbing harder than ever. She begged me not to do this, to give her one more chance. But her words meant nothing to me now. It's too late, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. I'm leaving. My lawyer will handle everything from here. With that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her behind. As I got into my car and pulled out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror, running after me, collapsing on the pavement as I drove away. For a brief moment, I almost stopped. Almost. But I knew it was over. In the end, Sarah signed the papers. She got to keep the house, and I gave her more than a fair settlement. But that was the last I ever saw of her. Tom and Lisa didn't survive their fallout either. Lisa filed for divorce shortly after, and Tom was out of both our lives for good. The aftermath wasn't perfect, but I got through it. Life doesn't always deliver justice neatly, but in the end, everyone got what they deserved. And that's how my 25-year marriage came to an end. Thank you for visiting my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.